Good morning and welcome to the CalSTRS board meeting. We're going to call the meeting to order. Brian, do we need to take roll here or can we take roll here and in the back as well?
I think you can, since you're opening the meeting, you
Yep.
should have a quorum.
Okay.
So we should tell them. Well,
So,
yeah, we don't have.
I mean, I know it's a little bit, but
want me to
formality
do it,
would
Denise?
require
I'll
that
grab
you
it.
need to have one,
I think we
two,
just need
three,
like another.
4, 5, 6. So you need another.
Okay. We'll
another
wait for a
two-
few more
another
board
2
members to
people.
come out and then we're going to go into closed session. So we'll wait for them to get here.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Jenny, would you take the roll, please? I believe we have a quorum.
Yes. Ms. Yamamoto?
Here.
Mr. Tang?
Here.
Ms. Bradford?
Here.
Mr. Henning? Or Ms. Hendricks, I'm sorry.
Hi, that's okay. That's a first. Wow, here.
Mr. Henning?
Here.
Ms. Miller?
Here.
Chairperson Keeley, you have a quorum.
Thank you. We're going to go into closed session for about 45 minutes, and we'll see everyone after our closed session. Thank you. Morning, everyone, and welcome to the CalSTRS board meeting. Jenny, would you, we're not taking roll, but I understand you have something you want to read into the record. Thank you.
The CalSTRS board meetings are live web streamed, video archived, and available to the public on calstrs.com. Individuals who wish to address the board should wait for the 10-minute public comment period at the end of the agenda item the speaker wishes to address. For comments not pertaining to a specific agenda item, there will be an opportunity for additional statements at the end of the open session. Each speaker is allowed a maximum of 3 minutes to comment. However, if there is not enough time for each speaker to have 3 minutes, the timing will be at the discretion of the chair. To protect the privacy of speakers under the age of 18 who wish to address the board, only their first name and affiliated organization may be provided, but other personal identifying information, such as their last name, age, or school, may not be shared. Since the last meeting, the board has received 2 emails from CalSTRS members about changing the annual earnings limit for retirees, and the Community College Association sent a letter regarding AB 1667 and overpaid benefits to retirees. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. The board met in closed session yesterday, and we did not take any action. After each item this morning, we'll ask if there are members of the public that want to address the board on that item, and Samantha will help us facilitate that with call-ins and people that are here present. At the before we adjourn at the end of the meeting, there will be opportunities from comments from the public on items not on the agenda. I'd entertain a motion to approve today's agenda, which is item 1.
So motion to approve.
It's been moved and properly seconded without objection. Thank you. Which moves us right to Cassandra Licknock, our CEO's report. Good morning, Cassandra.
Good morning, Chair, members of the board. I wanted to report that we have released our 10th annual sustainability report. I think you all received one. There was copies also available to the public for looking at. We're marking 10 years of producing this voluntary report, which demonstrates our commitment to the long-term organizational sustainability. It's an easy read and going over what it means for us and our progress and where we're going next. The report shows how we act as sustainability leaders and do what we ask others to do. It integrates the reporting of our various business areas, illustrating how their work creates a sustainable organization. It defines our sustainability-related achievements during the reporting period. And the report also includes our enterprise greenhouse gas emissions data, which aligns with our net zero efforts. For the first time, we're including our estimated Scope 3 emissions in our value chain. So there's a lot of good content in that report. The other thing I wanted to mention was one of the projects that we're doing internally that really provides additional elevated service to our members, and that's our contact center modernization project. CalSTRS' primary channel for our members to access us is through our telephone system. Now, the report says telephony, but I like to use telephone system because telephony is kind of a weird word, I think. So that's why I'm using that word. It's probably not as sophisticated, but there you go. On average, our customer service division receives 22,000 calls per month for a total of almost 265,000 calls that we received in the calendar year of 2023. Even with this volume of calls, our staff have been able to maintain a member satisfaction rate of 95%, and on average answered the incoming calls within 16 seconds. It's an incredible feat. And I think we've heard in a number of different settings in presentations the value that our members place on connecting directly with CalSTRS Contact Center Benefits and Services staff. In addition to the high volume of calls that they've received, staff also manage the online messaging portal, where slightly over 3,000 messages from members are processed a month, with an average turnaround time of just 24 hours. In June of last year, the Contact Center Modernization Project was initiated to implement a new telephone system to replace the current platform, and the new system went live just a few months ago in December. It did so without a glitch, and through that telephone system upgrade, we were able to provide the same excellent service to our members from day one. In January, all 5 of the Benefits and Services divisions were transitioned to the new cloud-based telephone platform. Benefits and Services is the largest branch in the organization, and duly so because that is where our focus is in making sure that we have easy access and correct information delivered to our membership. And that's one of the focuses that we're really looking at in our strategic plan, is how we make those improvements and advance innovative ideas to make sure that they're getting the information that they need. The new solution brings improved interactive voice response experience to the members through a self-service options, better workflow among the divisions, more accurate routing of members and their employer calls, increased reporting capabilities to analyze member and employer contact trends, and streamlined single sign-on access to the telephone system. The next phase of the upgrade is going to include implementation of post-call surveys for the employer services and retirement readiness. That's one of the most important things, is real-time reflection of how the members and employers are experiencing the connection that they had just made. We also want to advance leveraging the sentiment analytics to gain insight into customer interaction experience and offering speech recognition and integration with a new pension administration system, Benefit Connect, as we progress with the final implementation of that. So staff continue to explore opportunities to better explore our members and employers through the new telephone system capabilities, and really happy that we got that completed. On another just brief update, I'm not going to talk expansively about the headquarters expansion project because we have a substantial amount of context within the write-up itself. I was hoping that I would be able to just briefly say we're done, we're moving in, and call the movers, but we are delayed a little bit further. We had some issues with some door closures on fire doors. They're important safety measures and mechanics that we want to make sure that we don't that we have installed correctly. So once they're installed, it's about a 3-week delay in getting those received. We have to have them installed, and then they will do some other fire safety drills and to make sure that those are working correctly. But this delay does require us to extend the spending authority of $1 million. It's in the write-up. That approval and request for approval is under the consent action items at the end of the meeting today, but it's just an extension of the time. It's not to add any more money, and it's just up into the next May meeting. And with that, I will hand it back over to you, and any questions that I would be happy to hear.
Thank you, Cassandra. And I really encourage everyone, if you have not, really take a good look at the sustainability report. It's a tremendous amount of information, a lot of facts to be proud of our team and what the organization is doing. Thank you, Cassandra. Our next item is on our agenda is item 4, which is a compensation item. Crystal Turco, head of HR, is here, and Michael Oak from McLaughlin, who compiled the data for this report. It should be noted that this item is an information item today. We will not be taking action on the item. It will be coming back at our next meeting for action. So this is an information item. And before Crystal and Michael present, especially for some of the members of the board who have not been on the board prior around compensation, we have a compensation policy that's been adopted by this board that includes incentive compensation and other forms of comp. This item itself is not an item around our philosophy around compensation. It's not a conversation around incentive compensation. This conversation and this presentation is purely to present to us where we are for the positions that we have control over in our policy around the ranges and how we compare to a comparative group that the board has adopted to be a mix between public and privates. So Michael and McLaughlin looked at the comparative group, did the data analysis, and worked with Crystal to bring this information to us today. So what we don't want to have happen is us to get into a conversation and discussion around philosophy, around compensation, et cetera. We want to look at the ranges, what the numbers are, and there are a myriad of questions that will be asked today, I think, and there will probably be a lot of follow-up from board members. So today is really informational. I want to set that stage for those of you that have not been on the board and haven't been privy to previous conversations around compensation. So with that, Crystal and Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Harry. Crystal Turco, CalSTRS staff. You may recall the initiation of the labor benchmark study was presented last September. I'm returning today joined by Michael Oak from McLaughlin to present the results associated with the study. As Harry indicated, it was initially agendized as action. It is informational today, just to be, again, perfectly clear. The labor benchmark study is not an update to policy, rather following the board's policy and compensation program objectives, supporting the board's policy to position staff compensation to stay in line with the competitive market. The last labor benchmark study was completed in 2021, at which time the board approved adjustments to the salary ranges for the general counsel and the deputy chief investment officer, as well as set the compensation for the senior portfolio manager and the senior investment director classifications in support of the investments collaborative model. Because the previous mentioned classifications were established or adjusted in 2021, you're not going to see recommendations in the report that Michael's going to go over for those 4 classifications. However, as outlined in the write-up prior to 2021, there have not been any base salary range changes for most classifications for several years, including 3 classifications with salary ranges that have not moved in over 10 years. The last incentive opportunity increases were approved in June 2019. Before I turn this over to Michael, just a couple things I want to highlight and maybe echo a little bit of what Harry just said. This information is not an update to an individual's compensation. Rather, they would be impacts to the salary ranges for the classifications. And just as a reminder, one of the board's functions is to review base salary adjustments for your 2 direct reports, for your CEO and your CIO at your July meeting. All other salary adjustments for incumbents have been delegated to the CEO. And then the data, again, I feel like you were reading my mind a little, Harry, but that's cool. The data that is provided by McLaughlin today is based upon the board's established comparator groups for executive and investment positions. And the board went through a very thoughtful and strategic process in 2013 to establish the comparator groups for these positions. And Michael's going to get into more detail about how they, the methodology for providing the data to the board. So with that, I will turn it over to Michael.
Great, thank you. And thanks for scheduling this on a day when the weather is so beautiful. And I apologize in advance if I move around a little bit. I'm dealing with a failed spinal fusion, so if I'm fidgeting, just hopefully I won't be too much of a distraction. So as mentioned, we're looking at positions that haven't been adjusted since 2021. So on the executive side, that's the CEO, COO, CFO, and system actuary. The investment positions are CIO, investment director, portfolio manager, and associate portfolio manager. And as noted, the positions on the next little table are not part of the study because they were approved in 2021. This data includes base salaries and cash incentives. So those are the two elements of pay that we look at. So we'll use the terms total cash or total compensation. In this case, that means base salary plus cash incentives. And we do that methodology both for the CalSTRS data as well as the market data. And of course, we'll look at the 25th median and 75th of the market. So you'll see the range there. Just as a reminder for both myself and those who aren't looking at your comp policy daily, for executive positions, your peer group is made up of 67% weighting to U.S. public funds and 33% to a broad group of private sector investment management organizations. The investment positions are a blend of large and complex institutional investors. So that includes public funds like are in the executive positions, but it also includes Canadian funds, corporate plan sponsors, and then of course private sector investment firms. So there's a little bit of difference between the peer groups that are used, and we'll look at the details in a bit. We do size adjust the private sector organizations. So we top off, we're not looking at multi-trillion-dollar investment firms, and we're also not looking at $5 billion investment firms. So we're looking at a range of 100 to 500. And then just as a reminder, the administrative procedure states that's literally a copy paste from your policy. Cash compensation is targeted at the 50th percentile median of the board approved peer groups. Any questions so far? So this is the 67% weighting for your executive group. It's U.S. public funds, they vary in size, but in all cases, they have internal investment management capabilities. So organizations that sometimes we get questions of why is this organization not included, et cetera. So there's two reasons why an organization wouldn't be included. One is they don't participate in our survey, so we can't make up data, or I guess we could, but we don't. So we don't make up data. So they must participate in the survey and provide data to our compensation survey. And two, they need to have some kind of internal investment function so that the complexity of the organization is somewhat comparable. So organizations that manage exclusively through third-party managers and they only have staff that are responsible for picking and managing external relationships are not included. And as you see here, CalSTRS at $300 billion is well above the high quartile and is only smaller to CalPERS, as I'm sure you know in all of the studies that you do. And then in comparison, the internal management is about 45% at CalSTRS, and the median is 53%. So you're much larger with probably a rounding error relative to internal management in terms of who's defining what is internal, but fairly close in terms of complexity other than size. You're clearly much larger. And again, this is the 2/3 weighting for the executive positions. And then the 1/3 weighting comes from 350 organizations that are in our survey. So there are 43 banks, And this is just the investment functions. This would be like JP Morgan Asset Management. It's not looking at bank executives. It's just the investment management function. Same thing with insurance companies. So 64 insurance companies only looking at their investment function. Of course, investment advisory firms, these would be the BlackRocks and Vanguards, aside from them not being size related for the next peer group. And then we have the endowments, foundations, and corporate plans. So these organizations have a median assets of 31 billion, so about 10% of CalSTRS total. But clearly with 350 organizations, there's lots of data points here in terms of a robust data set. Bless you. And then for the investment positions, so this is a combined leading institutional investors. So again, you see here that this is a combination of large and complex U.S. public funds, Canadian funds, and then corporate pensions. And then the private sector are 74 because we've size reduced it to lop off the small and lop off the large. So 100 to 500 billion. And again, same grouping: investment management firms, insurance companies, banks. We're going to look at the executive positions first. So the CEO, COO, CFO, and system actuary. You see that we are looking at base salaries at first column. The next column where it says max percent, that's just the incentive maximum for the CalSTRS position. And then T-cash, that stands for total cash. That's just salary plus the cash incentive. Same thing on the market, the base salary, and then the T-cash, and that's just base salary plus cash incentives. So for the CEO position, the midpoint of your range is 400 for base salary. The market is 483. So you are 17% below that 483 number. And from a total cash perspective, when we add in that cash incentive, you are 13% below. And one thing I want to explain, because sometimes we get questions, later we'll look at percent increases, and sometimes people are confused because the numbers aren't the same. So these percents are the variance to market. So if you imagine if the market data here had a 100 number and CalSTRS was 80, the variance to market would be 20%, because 20 is the difference, and the denominator is 100 because that's the market, so 20% difference from market. Later, when we look at percent changes, that 80 number, so let's say we recommend you go from 80 to 100, it'll be 20 over 80, so that's a 25% increase. So it's 20% difference from market, but that would be a 25% increase from where you're at. So hopefully that wasn't more complicated than it needs to be, but I know that sometimes we get that question a lot where the percents don't look the same, and that's what's driving it. So in this case, you can see that 3 of the executive positions are double-digit below median for base salary, and all positions are double-digit below for base plus cash compensation. Any questions so far? Great. For the investment management, so same table here. The difference here is that we did add the number of incumbents so that you can have an understanding of how many individual people are potentially impacted by the range. So again, these aren't recommendations to the individual people, but the number of people that are in that classification. So of course, there's just one CIO, 9 investment directors, 42 portfolio managers, and 43 associate portfolio managers. And you see here from a base salary perspective, the portfolio managers and associate portfolio managers fall both 12% below median. And then the rightmost column, all positions are below market, ranging from 6% to 20% below. So these were our set of recommendations that are intended to align your ranges with your stated policy. So increase the salary midpoint for the CEO from 400 to 475. And the associated range there would be 386 at the minimum, 564 at the maximum, with a total cash range of 965 to 1410. For the chief operating officer, increase the midpoint from 250 to 300. And then noted below these charts, the CEO was last reviewed, or last changed rather, in 2013, and the COO last changed in 2017. For the CFO, increase the midpoint from 250 to 280. And again, the ranges are shown there, last adjusted in 2017. And for the system actuary, increase from 260 to 280. And again, the last change was in 2016. So here's a lot of numbers on a chart. So for those that are data junkies like myself, this is basically all the data that we reviewed so far, just kind of thrown into a single table. So the CEO, the range there, 325 to 475 with the midpoint of 400. The current variance to meeting, so that's 17% below the market range, and the market salary is 483, so 400 is 17% below 483. Our proposal is to increase that midpoint from 400 to 475, leaving you about 2% below median, a rounding error. And that represents a 19% change. So 400 to 475 is plus 19%, even though 400 to 475 was 17% below that number. So here's where we see those numbers where they might be confusing, but the negative 17 is the difference divided by 483, and the 19% on the right is the additional add divided by the 400. And then on the bottom of the page is the maximum total cash. So there's without changing any incentive opportunity. So this is just basically taking those recommended salary adjustments and then flowing them through the current incentive opportunities. You get those recommended ranges in the bottom, so that 1188 is just a factor of the 475 times the current incentive opportunity. And then you see the second to right most column on the bottom. All positions are within just a couple percentage points in median if you were to adopt these changes. And then, of course, to the right is the associated change in total cash, which is the same as salary because it's a multiplicative factor. Any questions? Great.
I appreciate you. When we talk about total cash and when you were evaluating particularly the outside or private industry total cash, I'm assuming that total cash means other incentives. Like if somebody had a car incentive, no, that's not baked in there. We're just talking about hard dollars and cents.
That's correct. So just to clarify, it's cash incentives only that are paid like cash bonus in the current year. It doesn't include anything like car allowances, and it also does not include like restricted stock options, even mutual fund deferrals, which are a cash mechanism.
Private jet, those types of things aren't included in total cash.
Exactly. Yep. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Moving on to the investment positions. For the Chief Investment Officer position, increasing the midpoint from 510 to 520 and the associated range there. This was last changed in 2013. For the Investment Director, increasing the midpoint from 327 to 355, last changed in 2013 as well. Portfolio Manager, increased the salary midpoint from 215 to 240, last changed in 2017. And for the Associate PM, increasing from 150 to 175, last change in 2019. And again, a similar chart here, just showing the kind of all of it together, the percent difference from market, what the recommendations are, what the percent to market would be after you, if you were to implement those recommendations, and then of course the associated change that represents from your ranges. Any questions? All right, well, that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Michael and Crystal. Did you want to, do you want to proceed with the next item, or would you like us to?
Whichever you prefer.
Okay, why don't we just do this for a second, okay? I want to reiterate for us a couple of key takeaways from the work that McLaughlin did, Crystal's presentation and Michael's presentation. Because I'm assuming that others might want to condense what we just heard and all of these numbers as to really what the key points were. The recommendations are to reflect adjustments to the ranges and not individual pay raises. Number one is a takeaway from me. The second one is the positions that are being recommended to adjust the ranges have not been adjusted for multiple years. Third is that the recommendations are consistent with our policy, and these recommendations are being driven by policy to bring us to the median point for these positions. And I only say that because there was a lot of numbers, a lot of slides, and we prepared with staff and Michael in advance. And I'm just making the assumption, maybe you're all smarter than I am, but those were like the key takeaways for me in the presentation. Crystal, back to you.
Okay. Agenda item 4B. And Michael, you're more than welcome to stay or take off if you'd like. Thank you. Agenda item 4B, again, this item was agendized as action, but a board direction is being presented as informational. I'm presenting for the board's consideration an amendment to the compensation policy, administrative procedures, eliminating the provision that limits annual base salary increases for the general counsel. So from a historical perspective, this provision was put in place in 2017. And it was done so at the time where the board had established the chief operating officer and the chief financial officer positions. In order to modify the education code and to get those positions added under your authority, you needed legislation. Part of the caveat included with the legislation, because you did have incumbents in state positions performing those jobs, was a policy, a legislative limitation limiting salary movements for the CEA incumbent, COO, and CFO as a way to prevent pension spiking. The provisions for the COO and the CFO no longer apply. At the same meeting, because you, ironically enough, did have a labor benchmark study going on at the same time, there was a large recommendation of a salary range increase that was brought forward for the general counsel. And although it was not part of the legislation, there was a board member request to put a similar provision into the administrative procedures that limited the annual base salary adjustments for the general counsel. In 2017-18, it was a 10% adjustment, and every subsequent year after, it was a 5% adjustment. I think what that has done, the unintended consequence of that action, it really has worked against the provision of your policy, like you heard from Michael, targeting the median of the market. As well as you have provided delegation to the CEO to make salary adjustments, and it has prevented the CEO from exercising her full discretion and delegation in the matter. So I think, again, just to reiterate, it was not done in conjunction with legislation. It just was a board member request. And so that is a policy consideration that we're bringing forward and would recommend that the board consider removing.
Thank you, Crystal.
You're welcome.
Again, this item is information as well. We'll come back at our next meeting for action. Mr. Prasant.
I'm curious. I'm a bit surprised because about not taking action on either of these items. I defer to the board.
Yep.
But both of them have been recommended by staff, and in particular, this one, the CEO has recommended it. And is it? I can understand maybe in the first instance, 4A, because there's a lot of numbers and all of that. But in particular, this item is quite particularized. And so what is the rationale for putting it off?
I think part of it is to have some clarification for individuals that may need some time with staff in between now and the next meeting. But having said that, if it's the desire of the board to take action on this portion of the item, we certainly can do that. We don't want to preclude that from happening. So open to how others think about this, and I want to reiterate, this does not preclude, this does not guarantee, this is not saying we're going to, this position is going to receive a pay raise. It's saying we're delegating this authority and empowering our CEO to make her decision and
it's-
discretion.
Yeah,
So,
as part of the policy.
yeah, as part of policy.
And so what we're doing is we're exercising our governance by providing that decision-making to the CEO of CalSTRS, which, about a personnel matter, which is something I think which is consistent with good governance. I mean, we don't want to get involved in everybody's particularized salaries.
I couldn't agree with you more.
And so I unless there's an objection, I would move that we adopt this recommendation. And if there's an objection, I understand, but if there's none, I move to adopt it.
So he's talking about 4B.
Okay, so is the formal, a motion by Mr. Prezant? Yeah, before we do,
I'll second that, his motion, so we can discuss it.
okay, so it's seconded by Mr. Tang to take action on this recommendation. And before we do, we'll go to questions and discussion. Ms. Gallegos.
Thank you. And I'm happy to move forward on a vote as well. Could you just tell us where you got the recommendation for the ranges? We heard for the investment staff from the consultant how he came up with the ranges. Where did you, how did you come up with these ranges? Just wanted for the record to understand where those numbers came from.
Used from the data that Michael just presented. Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Gallegos.
Can I add just one clarifying comment? That your policy does outline that a reputable third party needs to provide this data to the board. And so I just wanted to make sure I threw that in because I think it's important from a governance standpoint.
Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we do object to moving forward with this. We had a list of 5 questions which we submitted to staff that they weren't able to answer ahead of this meeting. I'm going to defer to the chair. 3 of them are about some questions around how the data was used and questions around a very comparable comparison with CalPERS. We would prefer to make sure that we have the information and the data before moving forward and not have this conversation at the board level. But we do believe that pursuant to our governance policy, there are some significant gaps in the data that we see here today. So if in fact it is the will of the board to move forward, we would prefer to ask the questions so they're on the record in terms of a very specific gaps in data that we think should be included when looking at these ranges. But again, I want to defer to the chair. I'm loath to get involved. I'd rather that data were incorporated into the information that the board receives so that we all have the same information. And I'm concerned that we're not quite at a point to answer some of these specific questions. So again, defer to you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, what I'm suggesting is that 4A comes back for action at the next meeting. That was information. We're speaking right now of taking action solely on 4B.
Right, I have the same unfortunately, and we did send the team a note. I will say that the comparison, for example, to CalPERS, there's some pieces of information that despite a very robust effort were not done in this item. And as a matter of governance, and we understand what this is, and we absolutely defer to the will of the board, we think that there's some specific questions, even on this general counsel, that that we as a board needed answers to. But again, I'll defer to you, Mr. Chair, and wait to ask any subsequent questions.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Miller. Let me go back to Mr. Prezant, who is the maker of the motion, and maybe you want to process some of the questions that Ms. Miller and the,
So I understand Ms. Miller's position with regard to her role on the Department of Finance and the concerns that the Department of Finance might have with regard to this issue, because there is a variety of elements that go into developing a budget for the state of California that, would provide a perspective on this particular item. but I suggest that, this is an item that B, not A. I understand A, but B is particularized to the general counsel. And if there is specific information you feel is incorrect in the presentation, I'd like you to point it out, because I think it's important to understand what is missing in the information that we've received on this particular item for B.
Ms. Miller, do you want to respond to Mr. Prasant's?
Yeah, happy
Great.
to. So again, our preference was to have these questions answered. I appreciate what you're saying, Mr. Prasant. This is not a question of budgeting. So one, the comparison doesn't include a strict comparison to the CalPERS General Counsel, for example. So we share data with the staff we've asked them to analyze on the minimum, midpoint, and maximum salary directly as it correlates to the CalPERS seat, Chief Counsel. So that's one. The other pieces that we're looking for are when we look at the ways in which these are considered, we've looked at some of the total comp questions, including how McLaughlin determined, I know this was a question of policy, that we only looked at cash and not incentive or total compensation, including health benefits. We also asked for the question about where and how the maximum amount that the pension accrues only to a certain amount, so we asked for that to be included in this calculation. There's not, we'd like to do this in a way that doesn't discriminate against the item. We just thought this information, which we'd like to be included for the entire board at a later time, could be included as a matter of course. And then the other questions that we just would like to make sure are some of the questions around tenure, so there might be a simple answer for some of the CalPERS comparisons that were not included and not considered. So we have, again, I'm loath to include all of this just until I get direction. Happy to go forward, but I do think that this would be a more fulsome and accurate discussion with the addition of these additional data points.
So with that, let me turn to Mr. Henning, who has some questions, and then.
And I think that a lot of that was addressed by our colleague, but I would say that the Treasurer's Office shares the Department of Finance's concerns and would like to have more information than less.
Okay. With that, we have a motion on the floor, and because I would like us to move the agenda forward in a prudent way. We have a motion on the floor. It's been properly seconded. We have a couple of options. One is we can simply call the question and vote on it and be where it may, and that's fine as well. Or Mr. Prasant, you can withdraw your motion and we can come back in May for action and see if some of those questions can be asked. Bill?
With a great deal of reluctance, but also recognizing the importance that the comments made with regard to information might have in the minds of other board members, and not making this an issue where I have to push a vote, which is a difficult vote to make on the part of many of the board members, given our efforts to reach consensus on most things here. I withdraw my motion. However, I think those questions should have been posed early on when the item was agendized at the last meeting, and you knew that this was coming up. And in the future, I think that these kinds of questions should be, with respect to staff and its consultants, make sure that those people who have particularized interest, elected public officials, treasurer, Department of Finance is not an elected public official, controller, have some idea of where we are, because we don't want to be in this position again. I personally wouldn't want to be in this position again. So I withdraw my motion.
Thank you, Mr. Prasad. So with that, I want to thank you for withdrawing your motion. I want to thank the Department of Finance and Mr. Henning for bringing forth your concerns. More information is always better than less. You're kind to withdraw your motion. I recognize that, Mr. Prasad.
Not kind.
And we'll simply bring these back for action at our next meeting in May. Thank you for the report. And thank you for the discussion, everyone. A good example of being hard on the issues but easy on each other. Number 5, proposed revisions to the lump sum death benefit. David and Rick.
Good morning, everyone. So this is an action item to revise the board policy with respect to the lump sum death benefit. And just to provide a little bit of background, this is one benefit for which by law the board has the authority to adjust, and we provide information and the board decides whether to adjust this benefit each May. So this is the board policy to guide such decisions. So we had a discussion on this, if you recall, in 2023. And at the time, the board provided us direction to come back to develop a policy, first to state that increases will be based on the inflation in California in the previous calendar year, but more importantly, the direction given to us was to include funding thresholds in our policy to help guide the decision. So that's what we've put together. One of the attachment number 1 is the proposed board policy. And what we really wanted to do with the funding thresholds is we felt it was very important for these increases to be tied to the success of our funding plan. So just to keep it in simple terms, what the policy says is we would recommend to you to consider an increase in the lump sum death benefit each May if we are on schedule or ahead of schedule in our goal of reaching full funding by 2046. And to help you see visually what we mean by this, so in the proposed policy, you see several percentages. When the funding plan was passed in 2013, we put together a projected schedule of where we thought if we remain on schedule, what the funded status would be at each of the valuations. This is the dashed line on this chart. These are the percentages included in the policy. So what we're saying in the policy is if the current projected funded status, which is what you see right now with the dark green bar there, as long as we remain above the dashed line when we come to you in May, we will recommend that an increase be granted for the lump sum death benefit. And again, it's a recommendation from us. As a board, you can always take action. Even if we recommend no increase, you could still provide an increase. So it's just similar to what we do with, say, the cash balance program and the DBS program each May, when we have funding thresholds in those programs as well when it comes to additional earnings credit. So this would be the same thing here. And the other aspect I wanted to point out that we also felt it would be good to include in the policy is even though we're gonna derive the increases based on the inflation in California in the previous calendar year, we recommended in the policy that these increases also be tied with the long-term inflation assumption that you have adopted as part of the actual assumption. So we currently assume 2.75%. So what we've included in the policy is to say that increases on an annual basis will be capped at 2.75. But if inflation is higher than this, because sometimes we have more, sometimes we have less, we would have a catch-up provision. So for example, this year, when we come to you in May, inflation last year in California was 3.5%. So we're going to come to you in May, recommend an increase of 2.75, and then we're going to bank the other 0.75. And the example here we have here on the slide is, what if inflation is 3%? We would recommend an increase of 2.75, bank the other 2.25, and when inflation is lower than 2.75, we would then potentially recommend a higher increase to catch up. So with this, the whole idea with this is over time, we wanted that if we grant increases If we remain ahead of schedule, we would grant increases each year, and those increases over time would increase at our assumed long-term inflation. So that's what's in front of you for approval. And again, you're not approving a benefit increase today, you're just approving a change to your policy that will guide the decision that's coming to you, the recommendation that will come to you in May, in 2 months. And with this, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Ms. Bradford.
Oh, I'm on. Thank you very much. I just want to move approval of staff recommendation and say thank you for all of your work on this. We kind of have to give context, I think, sometimes to some of our newer board members. I know we've been working on this for as long as I've been coming to CalSTRS meetings. I really appreciate that we're going to have a method of doing this rather than arbitrarily trying to figure out every year what the right amount is to increase, decrease, or do nothing. So thank you very much, and I will move approval.
I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved by Ms. Bradford, seconded by Mr. Tang. Before we go to a vote, we have one member of the public, Jennifer Baker. Nice to see you, Jennifer.
Hey, Jen.
Good morning, Jennifer.
Good morning, Jennifer Baker with the California Retired Teachers Association. Just wanted to know we strongly support this item and really thank the board and the staff for considering putting together a mechanism that's going to make this conversation so much easier, not just for you and your staff, but it's also so helpful for those members that are impacted by this. We just wanted to say thank you. Oh, have I been off? Do I need to restart or am I good? Okay, I just wanted to say thank you for the thoughtfulness, and we really appreciate your willingness to think outside of the box like this. It just makes it so much easier for everyone involved.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
No other members of the public. Motions on the floor to approve the staff recommendation made by Ms. Bradford, seconded by Mr. Tang. Any questions, discussion? Seeing none, we'll take a vote.
Ms. Gallegos. Aye. Ms. Sanders.
Aye.
Mr. Prezant.
Aye.
Ms. Yamamoto.
Aye.
Mr. Tang.
Aye.
Ms. Bradford.
Yes.
Ms. Hendricks.
With enthusiasm, yes.
Mr. Gunning.
Yes.
Mr. Henning.
Aye.
Ms. Miller.
Aye.
Chairperson Keeley, would you care to vote?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Rick.
Item 6 is state and federal legislation. We hope Joycelyn's feeling better. She's under the weather, and we hope you're feeling better, Joycelyn.
She's definitely watching. So.
Yeah, we hope you're feeling better. So this is an action item, and you could introduce yourself and, yeah.
For certain. John Meredith Simkowick. I'm the manager in governmental relations, and I'm here for Joycelyn, who wishes she could be here but can't. I'm here to present AB 2901 for a position for the board to vote on. This bill would provide for up to 14 weeks of fully paid leave for public school employees for pregnancy, miscarriage, childbirth, termination of pregnancy, or recovery from those conditions. Additionally, the bill prohibits a leave of absence for any of these reasons from being deducted from other leaves of absence available for the employee. Significantly for our purposes at CalSTRS, this includes sick leave, which at retirement can be converted into service and goes into the calculation for a member's lifetime benefit. So I would point you to the fiscal costs of this. So because this would conceivably result in more sick leave at retirement, we would expect there to be an additional cost to the plan, however minor. We don't know what that would be, but as we have on page 3 of the analysis, we've indicated that there would be an increase in the normal cost of the average member's benefit of 0.004% of pay, or about $4 per year. For each additional day of unused sick leave that is then converted to sick leave at retirement. So it would be a minor cost. We actually would support, we are recommending a support position for this bill. We believe that it would reduce and inequity and deficiency in the design of the plan. So that's under the board policy. And the reason for that is because 70% of our members are female, and so we recognize that this would result in most likely more sick leave for those female members. Female members generally have less sick leave at retirement as male members. They have less service overall at retirement even. So that is what we're recommending for you today. Do you have any questions for me? Or?
Thank you, John. I'm sure we'll have some questions, but before we get to questions from members of the board, I do believe we have members of the public that would like to address us on this recommendation. So I don't know if they're here in person. I think they're in the caucus room.
They're in the back.
Okay, Mary Kay. Oh, there you are, Mary Kay. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Mary Kay Scheid, and I am here representing the 310,000 members of the California Teachers Association. CalSTRS staff put together an excellent analysis of Assembly Bill 2901, which points out it is, quote, the board's policy to support legislation that reduces inequities or deficiencies in plan design. I want to add further texture here. Support can come in many forms. It would be more accurate to say it's the board's policy to support or sponsor legislation that reduces inequities or deficiencies in plan design. The California Teachers Association is asking CalSTRS to join us in being part of history or her story. Another quote from the analysis reveals, quote, while over 70% of CalSTRS membership is female, those female members, on average, receive lower benefits at retirement than male members. If we know women are getting nearly $100,000 less in their retirement benefit than men, then it is our obligation to lead the charge to bring fairness to the system, leading from the front. We have a duty to lead in this conversation, and we are asking you to join us in leading this conversation so that future generations will look back and say that this was accomplished when CTA and CalSTRS stood up together, side by side in partnership, and made this happen. We are asking for a motion to sponsor this bill. We are asking for you to take the strongest support position you can, sponsorship. Thank you for your time and your continued commitment to California's educators.
Thank you, Mary Kay. Kevin? Kevin Welch?
Yes, good morning, members of the board. My name is Kevin Welch, and I would like to piggyback on my colleague's comments. Gender discrimination comes in many forms for today's working women, and today is a good day for CalSTRS to make a statement. One of the biggest gender gaps is in the area of income, and this bill will allow us to attack this injustice head-on when it comes to retirement income. Today, some may ask, what is the difference between a support position and a sponsor position? There is no question that bills sponsored by an organization become the highest priority. Sponsoring AB 2901 means more than just showing up in a committee to provide Me Too testimony and sending letters to the policy committees or the governor. It means providing meaty testimony in public hearings so that lawmakers truly understand the implications. Being a sponsor means we go together to meet with the governor's office or with committee chairs. It means collaboration. It means we are co-pilots in this journey. Sponsorship means CalSTRS owns this conversation around equity and drives the conversation. We ask for you to sponsor AB 2901. Thank you for your time.
Doug here. Good morning, Doug.
Kevin's tall. You're really tall, Kevin. Hi, I'm Doug Orr, chair of the CFT Retirement Policy Committee. And I can't formally ask you to support this because we haven't actually decided to whether or sponsor this, because the CFT hasn't formally decided whether we're going to try to co-sponsor this. That decision will be made next Friday at our state council meeting. But all of the discussions that have gone on within CFT, it is I can fairly confidently say that we are going to co-sponsor this bill come Friday. Based on that, we are asking you, CalSTRS, to co-sponsor this bill for all of the reasons that Mary Kay and Kevin have just laid out. Thank you.
Hey, Kevin. Excuse me, Doug. Thank you, Doug. Mitch Steyer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members and staff. Mitch Steiger, Legislative Representative with CFT. We just echo the comments of my colleague Doug Orr and our partners in CTA about the importance of this bill. The importance of sponsoring this bill, as Doug mentioned, we haven't taken an official position yet, but obviously an incredibly important piece of legislation that will do a lot to reduce some of the inequities inherent in this system, and I think it's a very important measure and urge your sponsorship and support. Thank you.
Kathy Kinley?
Not on this bill.
Okay, we'll catch you later on, Kathy. Thank you very much. We'll open it up to the board. Ms. Bradford, then Ms. Tang, then Prasant, Mr. Henning, and
We don't have feelings about this.
Ms. Sanders. So we have quite a few names in the queue here. Ms. Bradford. Ms. Gallegos. Ms. Bradford.
Okay. Firstly, I would like to move the staff's recommendation of support on 2901.
There's that, please, second that.
And then I would like to speak to it, if that's okay.
Okay, the motion is to support the staff recommendation, which is a support position of the legislation, and it's properly seconded by Mr. Tang. Ms. Bradford, you can speak to your motion.
Thank you. So firstly, I'm very happy that CTA is co-sponsoring this bill, as I'm part of CTA, and I sure wish I could have all my sick days back from my 3 daughters so that I could add them onto my retirement. That would sure be wonderful. And I think we're about 100 years, probably 140 years too late in doing this. But with my support, I also have to remember that I am on the CalSTRS board right now, and we have very clear guidelines that we sponsor retirement bills, and this isn't really a retirement bill. And while we heard that it would cost, I think 0.04 maybe a year, I would just like to also say that I would argue that we also might get a lot more employees from this. So I still urge everyone to support it. Unfortunately, I just don't think we can co-sponsor it. So that is my heartfelt speech on supporting 2901.
Thank you, Ms. Bradford. Mr. Tang.
I want to echo what Ms. Bradford just said too. I am very enthusiastically excited about this bill in terms of supporting it. I wanted to move a co-sponsorship position. However, I was, in checking as my fiduciary responsibility as a board member sitting on here on this dais, and that's the one hat that I'm wearing now. As an educator, as a teacher, this is something that I've been trying to work for, and actually the concept of it has been with me, carrying with me for a very long time. I'm glad that CTA is doing this. It's sponsoring this and co-sponsoring this, and I will do everything I can to continue to support it. If you need somebody to go testify in the state legislature, I will be glad to fly up and do that. But I'm just saying that as a board member of CalSTRS, I am legally, I guess, lack of a better term, be limited under this jurisdiction. And so I just wanted to speak in favor of enthusiastically supporting this bill. I just wanted to share that, I believe in it so much that as a school board member, I've asked our financial department at the school board to do a financial study on how we can actually even pilot this at the school district level. So I just wanted to let the public speakers know how much I'm in favor of this. So with that, I'll leave it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tang. Mr. Henning?
The treasurer is a co-sponsor of this legislation, but for this matter, we're going to abstain for that point.
Thank you, Mr. Henning. Ms. Sanders?
The superintendent is also a co-sponsor of this bill, and so we share enthusiastic support, but understand our sole fiduciary hat on this board at this moment.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sanders. Ms. Gallegos?
The controller echoes everything that's been said. I do have a question, though.
Please, Ms. Gallegos.
It's for clarifying the cost. And number one, is the cost borne solely by the plan? And is there an external cost to taxpayers? And two, when you note here that it's $4 per year for each additional day, is that $4 per member, $4 to the plan? Just a little bit more clarity around what this costs. But aside from that, very supportive, and obviously, maternal leave is very important, but want to understand as the chief fiscal officer what the impacts are to both the plan and the taxpayers.
I'll give you a little bit. So David's gonna come up, but $4, so the $4 per each day, so that's not per member, but it's any additional days. So if then that's the number. We don't know exactly what that will end up being, of course, but there will be, potentially, it will end up being part of how we fund the plan. So David will expand.
Yes, and I told John I would be happy to come help him out if questions come up. No, so it is, so you have to keep in mind, so this bill would potentially provide, it's hard to quantify a cost. So what we try to do, we asked ourselves, okay, so potentially 6 weeks of extra sick leaves out of this. So it's probably very unlikely, but so we tried to put a very, very upper bound of like the maximum amount we might see, and we made the assumptions. What if every woman we have on membership, and just an interesting fact for you as well, if you did not know, about our female teachers have only about half a child on average. So for every 2 teachers we have, only one of them currently has a child. So what we've done is we said, what if every woman had a child and never used any of these sick leave and they were fully converted at retirement? We're looking at potentially an increased or unfunded liability at the maximum around $140 million. And again, I just want you to put it in perspective. Our total liabilities for the defined benefit program, what you will see in May, it's in the neighborhood of $380 billion. So when we say, so it's still $140 million, again, possibly the maximum amount if all of these leaves end up being solely converted to service, which is quite unlikely, but that's sort of, just to put it in perspective.
Thank you for that. And I'll just reiterate that the flip side of that is that we could attract many more teachers and retain and reduce costs in that way as well.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Gallegos. Thank you. Ms. Hendricks?
Yeah, thanks for that, David. And I really appreciate your question, Ms. Gallegos, because I think that just helps. It's like pennies on the dollar, but still a cost. I just want to say thank you to the treasurer, and I want to say thank you to the state superintendent of schools and then to CTA members. I'm a CFT member, and Mitch, Doug, I'm hoping next week that we will also, co-sponsor this bill. Pregnancy is not an illness. This just drives me insane. I'm a union leader in my local. I bargain our contract, and it gets my blood boiling that pregnancy is a choice that people make to have a family together. And so the fact that people have to use illness days is really an inequity that I hope this legislation will correct. I agree with your comment about attracting new teachers into this field. Europe and other places just do such a better job of taking care of families in these situations. So I wholeheartedly support this legislation along with my colleagues here today, and appreciate the collaboration between the state electeds and our teachers unions to help sponsor this bill, and look forward to its passage for future members and their families. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hendricks. So before we go to a vote, I want to thank the staff for your analysis. In preparation for this item, I spoke with staff about the actuarial implications. Would the investment team have to change their strategy to take on more risk? And the answer to both of those questions were satisfactory to me to support this legislation. I want to thank the stakeholder groups, the individuals, the organizations to bring forth this legislation. I'm grateful that our policy speaks to the inequities and a support position for inequities that exist. And clearly there's an inequity that exists around this matter. The way in which we deal with maternity leave is appalling in this country. And the fact that our members on average, 70% of whom are women, retire with less sick leave at the end of their career, their stellar careers, in which they're going to receive a modest benefit, are penalized for having to use their sick leave when they're with their little children is appalling. And yes, we're limited in what we can do in terms of technically support, co-sponsor. I'm happy we're supporting this, and I lend my support in any capacity whatsoever to help move this legislation, proposed legislation, into law, so long as I'm on this dais and afterwards as well. We have an obligation to our educators to do this. It's the right thing to do, and we should be on the right side of history within our policy. So I'm thrilled that we're supporting this legislation. So the motion on the floor by Ms. Bradford is to support the staff recommendation, seconded by Mr. Tang. Jenny, would you take the roll, please?
Ms. Gallegos.
Aye.
Ms. Sanders.
Aye.
Mr. Prezant.
Aye.
Ms. Yamamoto.
Aye.
Mr. Tang.
Enthusiastically, aye.
Ms. Bradford.
Yes.
Ms. Hendricks.
Yes.
Mr. Gunning.
Aye.
Mr. Henning.
Abstain.
Ms. Miller.
Abstain.
Chairperson Keeley, would you care to vote?
Aye. Thank you.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. John, some more?
I don't have anything else for you.
Okay, terrific. We have a member of the public who wanted to address this. Is she here? She threw me off there, John. Thank you, John. Well done.
I'm here to speak on the federal legislation, HR 82 and Senate Bill 597. I am not Susie Dixon. I am Kathy Kinley. I am the chair of the Government Relations Committee for the California Retired Teachers Association. I'm happy to say that Susie was in Washington, D.C., and she's been meeting with the staffs of Garrett Graves and Abigail Sandberger, the two co-authors, and the Ways and Means Chair, Jason Smith, Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, Senator Susan Collins, Senator Sherrod Brown, Senator Alex Padilla, and Senator Bill Cassidy. And all of those meetings were very positive. We are now at 309 co-sponsors for the House bill, and Representative Graves has done an updated video, which he did on February 28th on the repeal of the weapon GPO, which you can view on his website. They have also sent a formal letter now to Jason Smith, who is the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and to the ranking member, Richard Neal, and I have submitted a copy of that letter to the leaders of the Ways and Means Committee, requesting continued commitment to protecting Americans' retirees. And we look forward to working with you to bring HR 82 to the full U.S. House vote. The good news on the Senate side, that is now our current focus, is on the Senate side. On Tuesday, there was a fly-in by the Fraternal Order of Police and the International Association of Firefighters in support of the repeal. But what I'm really happy to announce is the 51st sponsor is the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer. So we are hoping that this will get us to the needed 61 co-sponsors in the Senate, and hopefully we will have some news within the next few weeks. So thank you for your attention, and again, I have a copy of the letter which I've submitted. Thank you.
Ed Foya, CTA NA retired, and also an NEA board member, retired, representing 329,000 members throughout the country. We had our annual meeting of the issues of the retired members, and we devoted an hour and a half discussion and presentation on this issue. The 300 members that were in attendance were from all of the state affiliates that are represented by NEA, which are 50 state affiliates. And we had our discussion, and in our discussion, we were able to give information to all of the states that are represented. And what we did at the end of the presentation, we found that we had a postcard to all of the 50 representatives, senators, and of the, this included the 35 the 35 Social Security states. In essence, what we have been able to outline, we have at this point with Senator Schumer on board, we now have 52 members that are on board. We just need 2 Republicans. If we can get all 7 of the Democrats that are not on board, we got this in the Senate. So one thing that we have is widespread support among the teachers across the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. Any other members of the public? Okay. Item 7 is organizational change management update. Information item, Crystal and Carlos.
Crystal Turco,
morning,
CalSTRS staff. I'm just here to introduce the board to Carlos Guzman, who is our organizational change management and transition manager. So happy he's here today. Carlos has recently celebrated 5 years at CalSTRS. And prior to coming here, he was the executive director of an award-winning education nonprofit for low-income youth, as well as a U.S. history, literacy, and leadership teacher. So he's not just an employee, he's a member. During his time at CalSTRS, Carlos has supported the development of staff as a trainer, designed meaningful team discussions as a facilitator, documented the wisdom and history of staff and leaders as part of succession planning, and collaboratively built organizational change strategies for CalSTRS goals and priorities. He earned the honor of being selected as a virtuoso in 2022. And his next priority supports Goal 2 of the strategic plan, leading innovation and managing change by creating a custom model and process to strategically move CalSTRS through change. He is such a valuable part of the HR team, that goes without saying, as well as a valuable part of the organization team. So with that, I'm going to turn it right over to Carlos to walk you through this presentation.
There we go.
There you go.
Mic's on. Good morning, everyone. Chair Keeley, Vice Chair Bradford, and fellow board members. Thank you, Crystal, for that introduction. I'm excited here. I'm here today to present to you all the progress and key activities that have been made on our journey as we build the CalSTRS way of managing change to build our organizational change management program. I want to start off by explaining to you what we mean by organizational change management. The program aims to build a strategic approach to how we sustain and manage change here at CalSTRS, with a focus on how we guide our people, how we support our staff and employees in managing change and embracing change. We work with partners across the organization to help make this happen, ranging from communications to training services, enterprise strategic management, and our project management office. ranging from a wide array of changes from technical projects to even physical projects like our expansion into HQE. You may hear me use the phrase OCM. That just stands for Organizational Change Management. I'm a teacher at heart, so I want to make sure that we kick things off with a shared understanding of what we're hoping to accomplish today. And with that, we have three objectives for today. I want to share with you the 3-year plan that aligns with our strategic plan for what we're doing to develop the program. I want to present to you some key findings and themes that came out of the assessment phase from the last fiscal year. And then lastly, I want to provide for you a progress update of all the key activities and next steps as we continue to fulfill our strategic goal around OCM. So with that, I want to remind folks of where this sits on the strategic plan. It is part of Goal 2 as we move toward leading innovation and managing change on resiliency, to grow our resiliency and efficiency in service of our members. When we're proactive about managing change and prepare for change, we're able to embrace change as our new way of work as we work toward innovation. And at the end of the day, when change management and innovation work in partnership, a great impact on our strategic efforts can be the result, all in service to our members as we aim to grow our resiliency and efficiency as an organization. I want to bring back to you this graphic that Cassandra opened up with at the last Chief Executive Report at the last board meeting. And this really nicely paints a picture of our strategic vision for the next 9 years. Cassandra mentioned that in the last year, we focused on the assessment phase. We identified how we ought to evolve our way of work, and we identified ways in which we can support or address those gaps that we may have to further build out those capabilities as we build the foundation for change management. In that strategic plan includes how we demonstrate the success. And change management is a little tricky because it could be warm and fuzzy at times in terms of how we measure our success, but there's also a technical side of how we measure our success. And we do that by analyzing and studying our people interactions, how we coordinate across the organization, and how we respond to organizational change as a CalSTRS whole. And so here's the 3-year plan that we've identified, starting with the last fiscal year. We started in the prepare phase. We're now in the middle of the build phase, and next year we're implementing all of our efforts. So for the focus of this presentation, I'm going to hone in on the prepare phase and the build phase here. Even though we are intentionally making efforts to structure this program in the next 3 years, I want to acknowledge and recognize the many efforts that OCM, along with partners across the organization, has been involved with, ranging from leadership transitions to physical transitions to technology projects. So what we've done is we've leveraged the work and the success of these past projects, identified some gaps or opportunities and ways in which we can improve to further build out what we're doing with organizational change management. Part of the prepare phase included a study of analyzing and evaluating what have we been doing well and what requires further development opportunities for OCM. And so we conducted a series of focus groups, 12 in total, with 71 participants across the organization, including an open invitation to staff, but really focused in on our partners and partnerships with past projects that we've done at CalSTRS, really to analyze and to look for how can we strengthen our organizational change management efforts around the people side of change, the process side of change, the technology side of change, and the organizational side of change as well, with culture. And so one of the assessments that we used was from one of the leading change management industry researchers, ProSci, where in pretty layperson terms, we asked folks to identify their responses to these 3 prompts. How is change management perceived here at CalSTRS? How do we apply it? And how do we practice it? And here's the results that came out of that assessment. There's some room for opportunity here in terms of our perception with how change management is perceived here at CalSTRS. We identified as a group that it sits on level 2, on isolated projects, where it is viewed as important by some and unimportant by others. And one of the things you'll notice on the far right at level 5, we're aiming for that organizational competency. What can we do to work toward making it viewed as essential on all projects and initiatives and as a critical core competency for the organization? When we move into how we apply change management at the organization, we found that this sits at a level 3, scattered throughout multiple projects, but not necessarily centered or centralized in one part of the organization to have that oversight and guidance. One other key component of that level 3 is that we apply it more as a reactionary, or in some cases it's missing completely. which could cause some trouble because as we move toward change and experience constant change, we want to make sure that it lives and breathes in all projects and all change efforts as proactively as we can. When it comes to identifying how change management is practiced, also sits on a level 3 on the multiple projects level. We have some practitioners who are working together across the organization, some senior leaders who are involved with the process, along with mid-level managers and supervisors, but there's some opportunity to really share this responsibility through a centralized group in the organization. Some other key findings that we identified, we have 4 opportunities as a whole to strengthen our change management efforts. First and foremost, because there is that varying perception of what change management is in the organization, we have an opportunity to better define or more clearly define what we mean by change management. What is it and what is it not? We also have an opportunity to build awareness and to educate our staff and leaders about what change management is and what services we provide. Along with clarifying roles, we have many business partners that we work with who have a whole lot of expertise that we can leverage in this effort. We have an opportunity to better clarify with each other what our roles and responsibilities are as we implement change. And then last but not least, and in my opinion, one of the most important factors here is we have an opportunity to engage staff and leaders in the process. Change comes with a lot of human reactions, with a lot of emotional responses, and so we have an opportunity to move people through that human experience of change and integrate that into our technical program. One of the other things we did as we were mapping out the vision for this program is we facilitated an executive visioning workshop where we asked our executives to think about how do you envision CalSTRS responding to change, not just at the staff level, also at the leadership level and at the organizational level. And some of the responses that our executives came up with is that they want our organization to be comfortable with change, to embrace a changing environment, to respond to change in a proactive manner, especially in the areas that advance the organization like innovation so that we can continue to serve our members as best we can. And so from there, here are the 4 tenets that we came up with as 4 components of our vision and program. CalSTRS organizational change management aims to provide a strategic approach, a holistic big picture approach that is aligned with our strategic plan so that we can move through transitions, projects, and consultations with an aligned strategic effort. We also provide guidance and structure for folks around how we navigate change. And again, the focus here is on how we impact our people, our employees. It lays out a framework and tools so that we can so that we can support our staff and leaders through times of transition. And like I mentioned before, honoring and respecting those partnerships and leveraging those partnerships as we do this together on a collective front. And so that wraps up the prepare and build phase, what we've been doing in the last year and a half. I want to wrap up by mentioning to you some of the next steps as we move into next fiscal year and we put our program to the test and roll it out and implement it. Some of those next steps will include focusing on integrating those partnerships, piloting and refining what we've already put together. A lot of these efforts are being piloted currently with our headquarters expansion effort and some of our technology projects here at CalSTRS. We are moving through recruitment efforts to expand our team to keep those resources internal versus having to pay outside consultants in the spirit of stewardship. And having folks who really understand the CalSTRS culture, the CalSTRS experience, and can respond to change perhaps more effectively than some of our external consultants who may not be too familiar with that CalSTRS experience. And then the plan is to build and implement a change management plan as we roll out this program. We're essentially doing change management within change management, so it's our responsibility to ensure that staff and leaders are equipped with the right information to be able to integrate and work with the program itself. And then last but not least, on an ongoing basis, not just in the fiscal year 2024-2025, we want to make sure that we're making the greatest impact as possible. And so in the same way that we were critical in evaluating our gaps and opportunities and strengths in fiscal year 2022-2023, on an ongoing basis, we want to ensure that we're making the greatest impact by evaluating our program. With that, I want to bring this back full circle. As we wrap up the 2022-2025 cycle and move into the 2025-2028 Engage and Act cycle, I'm sure you might be wondering, what is the return on investment on this long-term journey? And there are several that we can identify. On a cultural base, on an organizational culture base, we have an opportunity to really strengthen our organizational resiliency. And that's not to say that we're not a resilient organization, but we do, with a change management program, have an opportunity to strengthen that effort. On the technical side, the return on investment would be an increased rate of adoption. Are folks using the technology that we have embraced here at CalSTRS to the best of their ability? Have we equipped people with the right tools, information, and resources to be able to adopt that change? From a workforce standpoint, we could practice being a more agile and adaptable workforce as we get more and more used to preparing folks and moving through change. From a people side, we could have a highly engaged and a workforce and some talent that we retain in-house and we keep. And from a fiscal standpoint, like I mentioned, in the spirit of stewardship, this has a fiscal impact in that instead of paying outside consultants to do this work who may not be aligned with the CalSTRS culture and experience, we dedicate the talent and resources internally to be able to build this program out in alignment with our CalSTRS expectations, culture, and organizational capacity. And so as we move and look to the future, I want to invite you to think back to some of the comments that Chair Keeley made at the last board meeting in response to some of the DE&I efforts. And Chair Keeley, I would agree with you. CalSTRS is a great place to work because of its people. And like this change management program, we all are works in progress. But like you, I strongly believe that we can continue to work on an aligned front with those open hearts and open arms, with those curious minds and that compassion as we present, as we engage in this sense of how do we respond to change at CalSTRS? How do we continue to further the mission and vision and advance our organization as we embrace those changes? And how do we continue on this 9-year journey to build, manage, and sustain changes here at CalSTRS? And so with that, thank you for your time and attention. I'd like to open it up for any questions or comments you may have.
Thanks very much, Crystal. Carlos, terrific presentation and presented very, very well. Well done. Any questions or comments for Carlos or Crystal?
Nice job.
Really well done. We look forward to the update at the appropriate time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really well done. Which brings us to lunch. So we are breaking for lunch and we will be back at 12:35. So it's about 35 minutes. Okay? Thank you.
So, no talkie-talkie, go eat.
We are.
For the slides to pop up, so I'll just start my introduction in the meantime. So this item is, so believe it or not, it's been 10 years already since the funding plan was adopted. That was June of 2014. And every 5 years, we have to do a report to the legislature on the progress of the funding plan. So our next report is actually due on July 1st of 2024. So what we wanted to talk to you about is kind of like what we did 5 years ago, what we intend to include in the report. And we also wanted to take the opportunity, since many of our board members were not here 5 years ago when we did the report, we wanted to kind of give a little history of our funding to kind of help you understand how we got to where we are today with our funding plan. So again, this time around for the report to the legislature, what we plan to do in the report is provide a little history of our funding, how the funding plan operates. We'll focus sort of on the how we allocate the unfunded liabilities and so forth. We're going to have a section dedicated to the last 10 years to kind of what's happened since the funding plan has passed. We're going to highlight for sure how the funding plan works, why we are slightly ahead of schedule, like we've told you for the last 2-3 years. And then we're going to have also, like we did the first time around, a discussion in the report related to the risks that could prevent us from reaching full funding. And we also plan to include like a discussion around what could be done to reduce some of these risks to further strengthen the funding plan. So that's going to be included in the report. So what we wanted to do today to help you understand kind of how we ended up with the funding plan that we have is talk about the funding history of CalSTRS. And so you're going to see this slide here. So this is our funded status from 1975 to 2013. And as we go through that slide, We're going to highlight key points in time, because and you'll be able to see kind of key decisions that were made for CalSTRS. So some of you may not know, but before 1972, CalSTRS was funded on a pay-as-you-go basis, just like Social Security. There were no attempts made to pre-fund the benefits. But what was key here is there was a small fixed contribution for both members and the employers, but the state was solely responsible for the pay-as-you-go shortfall. And that's going to be a trend you're going to see over time. So the state was basically responsible to, if you want to cover the unfunded liability. Now we go to 1972. That was the first attempt ever in the history of CalSTRS to pre-fund the retirement benefit. It's the E. Richard Barnes Act. This is when the member contribution rate was fixed at 8%. The employer rate was also fixed at 8%. And again, the state agreed to fully fund the plan over a 30-year period. So at the time, a dollar schedule was developed to reach full funding over a 30-year period. Now go fast forward to 1986. This was the next time that a change was made to the employer rate. The employer rate increased by 1/4%. That was to cover the cost for unused sick leave. So the employer rate then went up to 8.25%, 1986. The member rate stayed the same at 8%. 1990, so now we're almost from 1972 to about 1990, about 20 years later, CalSTRS is still about 75% funded. Now, a second attempt was made to try to fully fund CalSTRS. That was the Elder State Teachers Retirement Full Funding Act of 1990. Again, the member rate did not change. The employer rate did not change. But the state agreed once again to fully fund the benefit. And at that time, the state agreed to pay 4.3% of payroll to eliminate the unfunded liability over a 40-year period. So again, that was the next attempt to fully fund. Now, what happened after this is, as you all know, in the late 90s, there was a big boom in the stock market. And like many pension funds in California and the United States, we became, for the first time ever in our history, more than 100% funded. And that led ultimately to some benefit increases for our members in the 1999-2001 timeframe. And what I really want to highlight here is, if you recall, what I've said is since 1972, the state was always responsible for our entire unfunded liability. But the first change that was made to our structure took place when those benefit improvements were adopted. At that time, the state included in statute that they would not be responsible for any potential future shortfall, unfunded liability, caused by those benefit improvements. So that's when we began having what we have today, this what we call, in law it's referred to, there's a date, but we call it the pre and the post 1990 benefit structure. So the state basically said around in that time frame that they would retain the responsibility for the unfunded liability, but nothing related to the benefit improvements that were adopted around that time. And also one other key thing is, for the first time ever in 2000, the board was given rate-setting authority for the state contribution rate only. So at that time, the state rate was reduced to 2.017%. It's what we call today the base contribution rate. And as a board, you were given the authority to increase the state rate by no more than 1/4% each year to a maximum total rate of 3.5. And that was only to eliminate the state share of the unfunded liability. Now the dot-com bust comes, our funded status drops to about 80%. And what became clear at the time is the rate-setting authority we had on the state side was not enough. And that also an unfunded liability started to develop on the employer side, and we had no funding mechanism. So 2003 is when CalSTRS first asked for a funding solution. That's key to keep in mind here, because the funding plan was not adopted until 2014. So it took almost 10 years of discussions with the legislature, with our stakeholders, to have an agreement in place. So just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of this. And then the 2007-09 crisis, financial crisis hit, our funded status started to drop. and some of you have seen this in the past, we were actually on a path to run out of money by 2046. And that's when our demand for a funding solution intensified, and it led eventually to the adoption of our funding plan in 2014. And part of this, to address our funding shortfall, you're all aware of this, but one of the key aspects of our funding plan, and we often call it as a shared responsibility, is our members agreed to pay more, the state agreed to pay more, and the employers also agreed to pay more. So as you can see here, so these are not the contribution rates in place today. These are the rates that were set by the funding plan. Now, the most important aspect of the funding plan is this. It's the ability given to you as board members to adjust both the state and the employer contribution rate to be able to adjust to changing conditions. Whenever you fund a pension fund, one of the key aspects is to be able to react to changing conditions, especially fluctuations in the investment market. And it's been working great for us. But one of the key things I want to point out here, so right now, the way the funding plan has been written is the rate setting authority we have, which is to be able to change the state contribution rate by 0.5% in any given year, or the employer by 1%. This authority is going away in 2046. So I know it's 22 years from now, but right now as it stands, the terms of the funding plan are going away in 2046, and we would revert back, if nothing is done by the legislature, we would revert back to the terms that were in place before the funding plan with a fixed employer contribution rate and very, very limited authority to adjust rates for the state. So that's what we have today in place for the employers and for the state. To refresh your mind on the state side, for the 0.5%, the ability to adjust the rate by 0.5%, that authority became effective in 2017 and 18. And as a board, you increase the state rate on 4 occasions. Now, for the last few years, we've been able to keep the state rate stable, but we increased it 4 times. The employer rate, that authority was given to the board in 21, 22 for the first time, and we have kept the employer rate stable. We did not change it for the last 3 years. And again, in May, when we come to you, you can expect us again to recommend no changes for both the state and the employer contribution rate. But the key thing that we want to highlight in the report to the legislature this year is the fact that the rate setting authority we have is scheduled to go away in 2046. And the other thing we're going to talk extensively in the report to the legislature is our complex allocation rules for the unfunded liability. So as I went through the history, I highlighted the fact that the state is not responsible for any unfunded liability related to the new benefits that were granted in 2000. So the state is responsible just for the unfunded liability for what we call the 1990 benefit structure. And we can adjust the rates to pay for it. But when it comes to the new benefit structure, the other thing that the funding plan did is it put a date in there that said employers would only be responsible for service accrued by our members up to July 1st of 24. So we have this other piece that we've talked to you about the last few years. We call it the unallocated portion of our unfunded liability. The good news is right now, today, this is a small surplus. But if you recall, when the funding plan was passed in the first 5-6 years, before we had the great return, we had the 27% a few years ago, that portion was a small unfunded liability. Now we are in a small surplus. It could quickly become an unfunded liability again if we were to earn less than 7% over maybe a couple of years. So we are monitoring this. So we're going to highlight this in our report to the legislature. And then what I wanted to show you here is don't worry if it moves, I'll go slowly. So it's a little timeline of our unfunded liability. What we wanted to show you is sort of how our funding plan works, and I want to highlight a few things. So first, I want you to just pay attention to the blue bar at the top. So this is since the funding plan was passed, going to the most recent valuation, which is the 22. So we've mentioned to you several times over the years that The state share of the unfunded liability is most volatile and could change quickly, especially as a result of investment performance. So you can kind of see, so it always goes from 14 to 22. You can kind of see that it went up fairly quickly, and then it reduced dramatically in 2021 after we earned 27%. But you can kind of see how it moves a lot. So what we want you to see here is how, because of the way the funding plan is structured, the state share of the unfunded liability is always going to be quite sensitive to investment performance. Now, the employer, it looks like it's increasing a lot in the early years of the funding plan, and it kind of stabilizes. If you recall, we've had discussion on this for the last few years. In November, we called it negative amortization. The fact that the employer rate was phased in over a 7-year period from 8.25 to 19.1, it was great to help the employers, but on the negative side is we were, in the early years, we were not paying enough to cover the interest on the unfunded liability. So the unfunded liability for the employer, their share, increased every single year. But if you look in the last few years, since around 18, 19, that number is not moving much. So that's the one great aspect of the funding plan for the employers, is their share of the unfunded liability as it gets paid off. If it moves from year to year, it's fairly insensitive to the investment performance. So that's mostly what we wanted to highlight with this. And with the report of the funding plan, what we're really going to, I think the main message is what we've told you all along for the last few years, is we're going to make sure we highlight that the funding plan works. We are making progress toward full funding. We are slightly ahead of schedule. We will highlight the fact that the employer rate is not sensitive to investment volatility. And we like the fact that the rate setting authority we have on the employer side, and we have limited increases, there's a maximum rate. This provides a lot of budget predictability for the employers. Now, there are certain aspects of the funding plan that could certainly be strengthened over time. The number one is the fact that it's going away in 2046. This will have to be addressed at some point. It doesn't have to be now. We're still 22 years from now, but considering the fact that it took several years before to get our funding plan, we don't want to wait till 2045 to have that discussion with the legislature. Another thing that's, from our perspective, that's also high on the list of things that should be addressed if there's a desire to strengthen our funding plan would be that unallocated portion. So we'll make sure to highlight that in the report. And then if there were other things that if we wanted to further strengthen our funding plan, there's probably some things on the state side that also could be strengthened if there was a desire to do so. And we've talked about this in the last few years. Right now, the state is actually on pace to pay off their share of the unfunded liability within the next 5 years, so which is great. It's one of the reasons why we're ahead of schedule. But once this happens, the law says that their supplemental rate's going to go immediately down to zero, which may put us more at risk if we go to a recession right after this. And we spent a lot of time last November in our risk report to highlight some of this. So what we want to do again with our report to the legislature is highlight some of these features again. And so the report, we are working on it right now. Our plan is to finalize it sometime in June. And once it's finalized, we will provide all of you a copy. And we will also make it available for the public to see on our website, as we do for the current report. And if you are interested to see the current report, a link was provided in the agenda item. It is on our website. And what we plan to do, probably starting next fiscal year, is we plan to go back and start meeting with all of our stakeholders again to start having discussions around our funding plan. Because it's been 10 years. We have new board members, same with our stakeholders and the employer organizations. We have new people in leadership, so we want to start and take the opportunity to sit down with everyone, explain to them where we came from, how our funding plan works. And then what we want to start doing is slowly have some conversation with them to see if there's a desire at some point to start strengthening our funding plan, and when would be the right time to start having those discussions. So we just want you to be aware that that's what we plan to do starting next year, to meet again with our stakeholders to have funding plan discussions. And with this, I would be happy to take any questions you may have.
Sharon.
Thanks, David. This is, I think I've been around for a while now. So when the funding plan first started, I think I was meeting with legislators to talk about we don't contribute to Social Security. And so it's interesting to feel like, oh, it's 10 years later and here we are. You answered some of my question, which is, it sounds like we'll kind of make sure that, our members understand the funding plan, which I think we do I think we have a lot of stuff on the website. I know we send things out with our publications for members about the funding plan. I know you and I have talked a little bit about this 2046 date, and I'm mindful of, Rick, how long you've been here at CalSTRS, David, I remember Ed Durman back in the day, all that institutional knowledge we've had, and the funding plan, you explain it like it's very simple, but we all know that there's complexity about it. So one of my thoughts is, if we do need to make some tweaks, because there isn't a plan after 2046, which sounds far away, but it's not that far away. In your mind, sort of, how do you think about when or how we should, I know it's challenging to open back up the funding plan, obviously, because we need, the legislature and all that. But do you have a sense of the time frame in terms of when we need to, maybe the range of when we might need to think about doing something about the 2046? Because it just feels like at that point it just drops off and we go back to, back in the day. And so, do you feel comfortable talking about that? I want to be mindful. Tell me your personal feelings.
Is I would love to know that by the time I retire, that we've taken care of this issue. And I don't plan to work until 2046, let's be honest. But no, for me, Sharon, I think, the funding plan works. And I think if we keep meeting with everyone, reminding them that we have a plan that works, even if all we were going to ask first, I still think that the easiest change would be to just simply not have an expiration date. Let's keep everything as is. It is working. Let's just get rid of the date that makes it go away. I think that would be probably the simplest thing to ask. But I think it's still going to take a lot of discussions. And so I think, I don't know, that's why for us, if we can, that's my own personal goal. So it has not been, I would love if by the time we come back 5 years from now, for the next report to the legislature, maybe we're more in a position now to, hey, maybe it's time to try something. So maybe over the next 5 years, what we're going to try to do is maybe have conversations with our stakeholders. And, again, it's a shared responsibility. And so we're going to start slowly having discussion with everyone to see what everyone feels. We want to make sure that we're all in agreement here. So we're going to work closely with our stakeholders to try to see if we do make changes, when is a good time. And I think maybe for us, I think the end date should be our priority. And then we can worry about everything else later. But I think that's the main thing we should worry about.
Thanks, Sharon. Seeing no other questions, thank you, David. Thank you, Rick. I guess the takeaway is we have a funding plan that works and we're slightly ahead of schedule. Thank you. Item 9 is the Enterprise Risk Management Report. Lynn and Phil.
Public comments.
Any public comments on item 8 on the funding plan? Okay, Mr. Folio. Ed, go ahead.
I just want to, as a stakeholder since 1957, I just want to say that sometimes we take for granted what's taken place here at CalSTRS. And as an NEA board member representing retirees throughout the country, we don't realize what we have here in California. We're unique. We took this plan, we had an unfunded liability. Other states had unfunded liability, but no one across the country has ever done what we have tried to do here in California. And with the help of the state, the employers, and the employees, we have been able to work together to make something happen that made us to have a great retirement. I was coming to a meeting with Lisa. She and I were talking, and she was amazed. She just came back from a conference, and in that conference, she was saying the same things that I'm saying to you, is through her professional contacts, we're head and shoulders above other state retirement systems. And so as a stakeholder, I want to say thank you. Thank you to the state, thank you to the board, thank you to all of the people that are involved. We sometimes don't do enough to say thank you, and I want to do it wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Said.
Thanks, Ed.
Well said, Ed.
Thank you.
Well said.
Thank you to the state. Right there, baby.
Phil, Lynn?
Hi, good afternoon.
Information item?
Yep, I'm Lynn Bashaw. I'm your Director of Enterprise Risk Management and Compliance Services. And while I'm still relatively new to the organization here, I've been here just over a year. Time flies pretty quick. I'm very fortunate to have on my team Phil Burkholder, who has been with CalSTRS for almost 20 years now. And he's going to present to you the information on our enterprise risk management. He's the Assistant Director, and him and his team have put together this information for you.
Right, thank you, Lynn. So to introduce myself, Lynn just did it. Thank you. I'm Phil Burkholder. Just wanted to, what we're gonna do is we're gonna cover your semi-annual enterprise risk management report. We give this to you twice a year. What's on the screen in front of you is our heat map, and this heat map represents management's most recent assessment of our risk profile across our 10 different risk categories. You'll notice there are 3 risk categories there that have black arrows representing change from the last time we met, and that would have been a change from June 30th to December 31st. Before we get too far into this, I just wanted to caveat this is these changes, the way that these are moving up and down, and some of my comments will talk about how we've changed over the years. This is healthy. We want these risk categories to be assessed regularly, and we want these scores to change as conditions change. Okay, so let's cover pension funding investments. We increased the risk scores here really to reflect the volatility that the markets were experiencing in the first 2 quarters of this fiscal year. So we wanted to make sure that we had represented that on the heat map. And you notice the inherent risk we increased a little higher than the residual risk. Again, the environment itself was shifting on us. Pension funding actuarial. This score, the residual score, decreased. And this was really in response to what we found out through the asset liability management process. There were 2 key assumptions that were reaffirmed, the long-term investment rate assumption and the inflation assumption. And since those were reaffirmed, there was no need to make those changes, any changes associated with those. This score had been increasing over the past year or 2 to reflect that we weren't really sure whether those assumptions were right on, given the way inflation was acting. We had gone through a long period of time where there was almost no inflation, followed by a couple of years of really high inflation. So that ALM study reaffirmed that, and we changed this rate, or these risk ratings to reflect that. And then a transformational change. You'll notice there are some significant changes in the risk score there, both inherent and residual scores. These are really meant to represent the successes that the project has been experiencing in things like getting the project scheduled, adopted, having a new contract with Sagitech, and also being able to fill some key positions on their team. So as a result of those successes, those scores are starting to come back down. Like the actuarial, those had been raising, had been increasing over the past couple of years as the project was experiencing some challenges. So now that we are on the other side of that curve, fully expect these will continue to go down if we continue to have successes.
Before we go to Before we go to the next slide, Phil, I just want to quickly mention and acknowledge a lot of the work that Kirsten Casella has done in the Legal Operations Office. She's been working really hard on the third-party risk management program internally. And so while you'll see that our scores haven't changed just yet because we're still in planning and design phase, we do hope that they will change in the future. But again, I did want to acknowledge all of Kirsten's hard work that she's been doing, and it's just fantastic for the organization.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to our emerging risk universe map. You'll notice we've had some movement on this map too since the last time we met. Again, I think these are healthy things. We're having discussions. We're making changes as we're seeing our environment shift around us. So we adjusted the change management fatigue placement to right around a year now, or within a year. Went from a year to within a year. And this is really to recognize the fact that we're getting ready to experience some significant change around HQE and all of the change associated with moving into the new building. And we're getting nearer the end of pension solution, and there'll be a lot of changes that come from that. So that we move that to represent that. And you heard from Carlos earlier, right before lunch. The organization is working on addressing this. And as that program gets up and running, I would expect that it's a good chance this little dot will be removed, as it will no longer be an emerging risk. It's something we're managing actively. The generative artificial intelligence also moved closer to CalSTRS. This is one of those areas where, as an organization, we tend to be cautious and not jump into things, and that's wholly appropriate for a lot of things. And this is another one of those areas where, as an organization, we are taking our time trying to get governance in place around this before we start acting. But we also recognize there are some parts of the organization that need to explore this option a little more. There are competitive advantages of being an early adopter, specifically for like investments areas. So we wanted to make sure that we represented that this could be sooner rather than later as the organization continues to explore this particular topic. And the final change, which is not obvious on here, is we removed ungoverned software as a service from this map. And we removed it because it's no longer an emerging risk. The organization is managing this risk actively. We have some controls in place, and we're seeing that they're effective. So it's no longer represented on here. We are continuing to have conversations, active conversations every quarter with the executive team and every month with our risk champions to evaluate any of these emerging risks and trying to determine any new ones. And we're going to continue to do that. So I'm prepared to attempt to answer any questions, and I'm sure there's a whole lot of risk owners who are happy to answer questions if.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Lynn. Any questions from the board? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much.
Great,
Look forward to seeing you in 6 months or so, right?
September.
Great, yes, sir. Thank you. Pension Solution Project Update. Sheesh, Bill, Chris. Information item, updating us on Pension Solution.
Thank you.
You're
Good
welcome.
afternoon.
Good
My name is
afternoon.
Ashish Jain, Chief Technology Officer. I'm happy to report that the team is making a good progress, and Anthony and Chris will provide you with the update. Chris? Sorry. Anthony?
Right. Good afternoon, members of the board. Anthony Sweeney, Pension Solution Project Director, and I'm here to provide the latest update on our Pension Solution Project. Before I get into the agenda, I wanted to let you know that we recently hired 2 new leaders on our project team. Justin Long was hired to lead our change management and communications team. Justin comes to us after a 30-year distinguished career in the U.S. Navy and has an extensive background in change management and project leadership. Also joining our leadership team is Ashley Dodds, and Ashley is the lead over our financial services business team and liaisons with the financial services branch on project requirements, design, testing, and other project needs. Ashley's been with CalSTRS since 2012 and has previously worked with our CalSTRS employer community, worked on continuous improvement projects, and most recently worked on our Business Direct financial system support team for 8 years before coming to the project. Ashley and Justin started in early February, and we're extremely excited to have them on board in their new roles. Ashley had a prior commitment today, but Justin is in the audience today, so I'll ask Justin to stand. Welcome, Justin. So that leaves us with only 2 leadership positions remaining on the project, and one has just completed interviews. We're finalizing a candidate now, and the other has interviews scheduled for next week, so we're excited to round out our leadership team. So today, my update will cover the efforts and accomplishments of our data team. I'll cover our usual project metrics and share a new overall project schedule metric with you. And lastly, I'll cover our current budget status and provide a contract extension update for our independent project oversight consultant. So as you are probably aware, data conversion is a huge component to the success of any large-scale technology implementation project. And in the pension world, it's significantly more important. Nobody wants their member data, their service credit, or their financial records left behind in a legacy system. In addition to ensuring the data is converted over, legacy data has a history of not being the most pristine after decades of reporting discrepancies, and the need to clean that data so it can be consumed with all the enhanced edits and audits of our new system. So our pension solution data team is comprised of a Sagitech and a CalSTRS data conversion team, a data quality team, and a data validation team. These teams are responsible for all data activities being completed, and we are ready to operate in our new Benefit Connect system in fall 2025. Our data team has been responsible for converting 2 billion records and 425 million individual payroll reporting lines of data, and including 2 million member records. The teams have identified and resolved over 3,000 defects in the conversion of the data. They've archived over 170,000 accounts that have no benefits remaining to be paid and don't need to be tracked any longer in the new system. And they fixed more than 7 million data inconsistencies. So if all that wasn't impressive enough, they have recently reduced their inventory of data defects by 2/3 as we work to get the data even closer to 100% by go live. So I want to recognize the data team, headed up by their fearless leader, Gabriel Debbia, who would undoubtedly credit his amazing team for all the work they have done, which is evidenced by the data army he's brought in. So I'd like to ask the data team to stand. Thank you all for your commitment.
Thank you.
So next, we have our regular project metrics. Uh-oh. This is the wrong deck. Okay. Oh, well, let's go with this one. So this is a new slide, hence the discrepancy here. But this is a new project metric I'm introducing to you. As a best practice and per the recommendation of Chris and our IPOC team, we have developed an overall project metric dashboard. To date, my metrics have focused on outlining the progress of our current system integration testing effort and our current and overall defect rates. But this metric encompasses an overall status for the project, as well as 5 key work streams that I'll point out on here that are critical path activities. The work streams that I wanted to point out are data conversion, employer readiness, technical testing, which includes our current SIT effort, user acceptance testing, and business transition, training, and change management activities that prepare us for go live. The colors represent the current status of the overall project and the individual activities. These colors are not just arbitrary subjective statuses. Each one has a planned and actual completion percentage based on the project of each activity in our massive project schedule. There are ranges that determine if the work stream should be green, yellow, or red. I'm happy to report that the overall project is in a green status, as well as the majority of our work streams. One yellow status of the critical path options that I mentioned is on our user acceptance testing. And it's a result of getting a later start on our UAT planning and preparation. We had done a significant amount of work on UAT in previous years, but when we developed the new project schedule with the fall 2025 go-live date, we restructured our testing efforts. Most of the UAT test scripts from the original plan are being used as test cases by Sagitech in our current SIT testing efforts. That required the need for us to reimagine what our new UAT would look like. We did some preliminary work, but we were awaiting the expertise of our new test team vendor, Linea, to be onboarded and provide their input on the UAT approach. That occurred in October and November, and we continue to work with our business areas, our project team, and our vendor to finalize the UAT test plan. So progress is going well. We anticipate being back on track within the next few months. And actual UAT is not scheduled to start until October of 2024. So we have sufficient time to complete these planning efforts before we get into actual execution. I will be presenting this metric with you to you at future board meetings. You can see a January status. We'll keep 3 months of statuses so you can see any deviations that might occur over the course of one board meeting to another. And I have another view that shows key activities on each of these critical path work streams that we'll share the next time. So moving on to our usual project metric slides, here's the view of our test cases planned over the 18 months of system integration testing through December of 2024. This is the end of month view, and this view has the end of January because of the timing when we extracted the data for the board metrics. But as I fast forward to the next slide, it shows the last 3 months in a weekly view, so we get more timely data showing our plan versus actual over the last 3 months by week. As you can see, as of 2/25, we fell a little bit short, approximately 75 test cases of our planned numbers. As of today, we have made up about 20% of that deficit and are closer to our target. Because of timing of test phases, we do expect fluctuation as we move through our testing efforts, but we're confident we will be able to track more closely to our planned targets as we proceed with testing. But we do expect these type of variances from time to time, depending on the time of month we're extracting the data. Our next slide that you're familiar with tracks the number of defects being identified in our SIT testing for the full 18-month duration. And as of the end of January, we were right on target with our expected defect rate, which indicates the quality remains high of our testing and our resource projections to resolve defects remains accurate. The orange line identifies our outstanding critical and high defects in SIT that must be resolved in order to pass test cases. That number continues to remain steady as we move through our testing efforts. And this next slide gives you a more up-to-date view through the end of February, and you can see the overall defect rate has dropped a bit, which is positive, and the critical and high defects has increased slightly, but remains fairly steady and is normal for this stage of testing we're currently in. This last metric slide is our total count of critical and high defects that are to be fixed across more than just system integration test. This includes data conversion, batch and interface defects, as well as application defects scheduled to be resolved in future testing streams. The overall number is remaining steady, but you can see the data bucket of defects in the gray has decreased significantly over the last few months, as I reported a little bit earlier. And our team has been working on a resolution plan to ensure we can timely resolve the defects identified here, as well as planned defects we plan to find over the next 9 months. And based on our recent trends of introducing new and resolving existing defects, our data looks positive, and we're working with our oversight vendors to validate our methodologies and ensure that we remain on track. Our last slide is tracking our budget data to date. The budget authority approved by the board in November 2023 increased the total budget attributed to our go-live date in fall 2025 to the $523.1 million number, which is being tracked in the table here. As a reminder, an additional $104.7 million is approved for post-implementation maintenance and operations and stabilization activities. Our budget data to date is as of 12/31 of 23, and the actual expenses are $345.1 million across our 3 major categories of expenses for our CalSTRS project team, our technology administration costs, and our solution implementation vendor costs. For this fiscal year, our expenditures through 6 months total $27.9 million, which is on track with our budget authority for the remainder of the fiscal year and the overall project. I also wanted to mention the CalSTRS team met with Department of Finance for a Q2 update on the project status and budget on February 2nd last month. We shared several project updates as well as the budget status, and these meetings continue to be an effective communication tool for both parties, and our Q3 update is scheduled for May of 2024. Before I end my report, I wanted to mention the proposed extension of our independent project oversight consultant contract that will be before you in agenda item 11D. The current IPOC contract is scheduled to end on May 31st, 2024, and we are requesting your approval to extend for 12 months through May 2025. We would like to continue to have Guidehouse provide an independent perspective on our system implementation project processes and practices, which we believe is critical for our project success. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions before we hand it over to Chris.
Seeing none, we'll thank you, Anthony, for the update. We're going to turn over to Chris Cabody. Chris?
Thanks, Eric. Good afternoon, everyone. Chris Cabody with Guidehouse and our independent project oversight update. We concur with the data and the information that Anthony just shared. He discussed the metrics showing that system integration testing is a little behind right now. We've had conversations with Sagitech ongoing, and every time we see that, we sit down and talk. And as Anthony said, what you're going to see over a long period of time testing like this, it's complex and large, is you'll see those fluctuations where it's going to be above plan, it's going to end up going below plan a few times. And what we're confident with is Sagitech's ability to recover. And so we don't have any specific concerns around that status right now. I think they have a plan to get back on track. And there's also some discussions around the metrics themselves that will help bring things into line, I think, as well. So again, we're comfortable with that process and where they're at. There's always a risk of burnout of teams, right? If you have to keep catching up or if you maintain a high level of execution over a long period of time, and Sagitech's well aware of that. So they, again, they're mitigating that risk. It's just something that, again, we're aware of and we're talking about. You also saw a schedule-based metric that was new that Anthony put up there. I think next time you might see one that's a little bit different than that. It's the one that we've been recommending for some time, and it's based on the project schedule itself. So what we wanted to show was a holistic view of the project with the timelines for the key activities that are on the critical path. So they have a material potential impact to the schedule itself and the go live. And so what you'll see there, again, are those activities, their dates, their extensions of when they're going to end and start, and where they're at. And so, as Anthony talked about, The one that was noted as yellow in there was the user acceptance testing planning. The testing itself is set to commence in Q4 of '24. This is the planning phase, as he mentioned, and we've been involved in a lot of those conversations, a lot of those meetings, and we're comfortable with where it is right now. We've considered it a reasonable delay, I guess if you'd call it a delay. It's critical that this strategy setting the objectives, formalizing those in the documentation, and getting agreement on that process and how that's going to work. It's really important that that be done right and that care be taken, and that's what's being done right now. It's not something that you want to try to maintain a schedule just to get it on paper. And so I think the reasonableness that we talked about is the result of the way that that's being carried out. So we're happy that, honestly, that it is where it is right now. We're confident that it will catch up and it will be back to green, obviously prior to testing commencing, but again, we're comfortable with the process and we are a part of that. I'll continue to monitor and we'll report if we have any concerns as we go through that, but again, it's a critical phase, and so getting it right in the beginning is going to be important. And back to that schedule view from the project management perspective, we feel it's really important for the project management office to really manage to that project schedule. Again, it's the overall holistic view. We really have been focused on the system integration data and the system integration testing data that you see here. And there are a lot of other things going on, like data conversion that Anthony talked about earlier. So the project management office managing by that schedule and making sure that there's clear visibility into the tasks themselves and where they're at against the schedule, highlighting the ones that may be behind, identifying where action may need to be taken by decision makers. That's all part of that schedule perspective, and so we're happy to see that that's going on. From the vendor management side, we continue to see positive interaction with Sagitech and all of the vendors and CalSTRS that are on the project right now. And that seems to be going well. The project management office is working to work through documentation that tracks and manages all of the deliverables and the contractual obligations for all of those vendors. And so that's something, again, that's important from that perspective and that they are working on. So we're, again, continuing to track that. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chris. Don't see anyone in the queue up. Okay. Do now. Ms. Miller.
Sorry. Well, I have a question, but I also just have huge compliments for Anthony and your team and the whole data team and your new project manager. I don't know if she's here, but is she in the audience? Thank you. I don't know if you want to just maybe introduce her, Anthony. I just think, no, just this really is just an epic example of extraordinary tenacity, resilience, leadership, partnership with a consultant. The sea change we are in now from 2020 and 2021 is phenomenal. So I just can't say, I mean, this isn't perfect. We have a lot to look out for, but the communication and really the tireless efforts to really move this is truly, truly phenomenal. So I just can't say, express enough gratitude. I do think, I just note that you're putting together, I think it's really important, kind of the project metrics for this dashboard. That will be a great way for the board to see, in addition to the heat map, just to really keep track of where and how we're heading on this. I do think that would be really just an important piece of it. And then the other thing, and Mr. Caboti, I think you can, we do not expect perfection in a user acceptance test. So just be really, just please know that. I think it's okay to kind of continue to report these deficits. I think the question we're always asking is how we're curing them. So I'd really like to be open about that, because obviously that's where we had some problems in 21. So just accepting that, of course, there'll be things we need to fix, and we'll just be really clear on the deficits to cure. But just to the data team, thank you all for coming. This is really phenomenal. This is super hard work. None of us, certainly I could not do it. And then just really grateful for your leadership, and Chris for your oversight. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Gil. Well said. Mr. Henning.
I appreciate you, Chair. I wanted to add my kudos as somebody who's run at one point the largest computer modernization program in the state. It's not easy managing folks. And I've worked with Sagitech before. They've done tremendous work with the state in various different pieces, but making sure that they continue to hit their marks, making sure that they're managed well, that's also a huge accomplishment. So I don't think this can be understated, particularly when you're dealing with the stage gate system and different procurement methods that the state has set up moving forward. But I would also, I'd encourage you, Ms. Miller, and I definitely will have a conversation with the state's IT procurement side and the way that they look at their management of their IT projects, so they come back and look at this. Those getting down the little problems that come up is incredible that you guys have been able to get that down to such a manageable level. Again, just this is tremendous work. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, thank you, everyone, and look forward to our next update in a couple months. Okay, take care. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you to the members of the team, Ashish, members of your team that are here that are working on this project daily. Thank you, sir. Item 11 is the consent agenda action. And I know for 11D, contracts requiring board approval, Ms. Yamamoto, Karen, you have a question on 11D.
Yes. Thanks for the great report, and I'm not wanting more information about the contract itself, but I was noticing that the contract ends May 31. This is a couple months before the end of go live date. So I was wondering how that will match up to when Guidehouse contracts ends and the go live date starts. I think they all went away.
Lisa, can you address that, or Cassandra?
Yeah, I think it's because that's the extent of our extension timeframe on that contract. If we need services, we'd have to actually either extend again or depending on.
Okay, so we'll come back again
We would come
to
back
look at
again
it
if we
again.
need to.
Okay,
Right, yeah.
okay, all right,
Okay.
that's fine.
Okay, thank you. We're all set, Ashish. Okay, you're welcome. Anyone else have a question or a poll on any of the consent agenda action 11? Seeing none, is this a roll call vote? Yes, okay. Jenny, would you take the roll, please?
The Board Governance Committee has
Please.
a motion as well. The Board Governance Committee moves the adoption of the revisions to the Board Governance Manual Appendix 3 concerning delegation authority for contracts with edits for clarification provided by the board, and the policy review policy with edits to include the ability to review the policy in its entirety. The committee also moves adoption of the proposed revisions to the Education Policy Revision and Board Governance Committee Charter as presented.
Thank you, Jenny. Nothing else that has to be read into the record?
No.
Okay, thank you. And we'll take a roll call vote on the consent items, please.
Ms. Gallegos?
Aye.
Ms. Sanders?
Aye.
Ms. Yamamoto?
Aye.
Ms. Bradford?
Yes.
Mr. Gunning?
Yes.
Mr. Hen?
Aye.
Ms. Miller? Chairperson Keeley, would you care to vote?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Jenny. Before we go to item 12, I wanted to report out that at our prior board meeting, the board met in closed session. And at that meeting in closed session, we took action on 4 items. The first is we adopted a subcommittee charter for the CIO search. Second, we selected the subcommittee members. Third, we approved the CIO description. And fourth, we adopted a subcommittee work plan. Those were 4 actions that the board took in closed session at our prior board meeting surrounding actions related to the CIO search that we are underway. Okay? Thank you very much. Item 12 is items referred to the committee for board decision. I don't know if we had any. We didn't have any, right?
No.
Thank you, Jenny. Item 13 is new business and review for information request. I would like to put in this request. Vice Chair Bradford and I, and communicated with the appropriate staff. At the next meeting, when the compensation issues come back to us, we would like to propose that the compensation matters for the fiscal year 24-25, beginning July 1st, we reconvene the compensation committee and take compensation out of the full board and reconstitute the compensation committee that existed a few years ago. So compensation issues in 24-25 would be delegated to a compensation committee as it had previously been done. And we'd just like that to come back in the appropriate format for the action to take place, so that can happen in 24-25. And in 24-25, the compensation committee, not the full board, will review matters related to compensation, including philosophy and other issues that are related to compensation. Is that correct?
Yes, and just for the new board members, everyone will get a sheet to select what committees they want to be on in May, correct?
Right.
Okay, just so that
Cassandra, is there anything else that we wanted to add on that?
That's correct. That's
Okay.
perfect.
All right. So if you're really excited about compensation, you'll have an opportunity to be on the committee. 24-25.
Mr. Prezan is chair.
Yeah.
The draft agenda for the next meeting, Cassandra, anything you want to highlight?
Well, in May, we'll also be selecting the board chair and vice chair in May, and that will precede the committee selection, which will be conducted not within the board meetings, but by the new board chair.
So we're in
and
campaign
vice chair.
season.
Yeah, exactly.
We're campaign.
And then the other thing I just wanted to note, we have a lot of actuarial content next May, but we're also going to be adding the compensation items back on the May agenda for action following today's discussion.
Terrific. Thank you, Cassandra. Item 15, opportunities for statements from the public. Do we have any members of the public that would like to address the board on items that were not on the agenda today?
We have no members of the public in the queue.
Thank you, Samantha. So that brings us to the end of our open session meeting. So we will move into closed session in 5 minutes.